Hello everyone, and welcome to the breakdown of the third ever Doctor Who story, The Edge of Destruction. This is the third serial of the first season, and with only 2 episodes, is one of the shortest in all of Classic Who. As with the last 2 stories, we'll be watching the first Doctor throughout this adventure, along with his granddaughter Susan, and fortuitous companions Ian and Barbara. This story finishes off the first 13 episodes approved of by the BBC, before a full series was called for, and concludes what I consider a trilogy, at least character development-wise. Other names for the serial include The Brink of Disaster, the name of episode 2, Inside the Spaceship, and The Spaceship. I'm going to warn you right off the back, I consider the serial the Twilight Zone of Who. It's weird and odd and confusing as all hell, but I'm going to do my absolute best to explain it. Let's begin. We start right where we left off, with everyone being blown back and knocked out by an explosion at the TARDIS console. While some very Scooby-Doo-esque music plays, we see all is still. Well, except for this mysterious shadow, but you know what? Let's just ignore it. The first sister is the one farthest from the blast. Barbara, confused and trudging forward while wrapped in a blanket that I think is the fabric Ganidus gave her. I like to think so anyway. She passes the unconscious doctor, never pausing to see if he's alright, but stops when she spots the younger man slouched in a chair after fall 13.
Ian Chesterton?
Well, that doesn't seem like a very good sign at all, does it? To Barbara's surprise, Susan gets up from behind her, but like her history teacher is also in a strange fog. Her amnesia seems to come with a stronger migraine as she winces back in agonizing pain.
Oh, my neck hurts too.
Barbara follows to help, but Susan insists that she's alright before noticing someone she could never forget on the floor.
Grandfather!
Leaning down to inspect him, they discover a pretty severe wound on his head. Barbara sends Susan for some ointment and water, but as the young girl stands up, she notices the other stranger in her home. She stands there dazedly for a moment before Barbara reminds her of the medical emergency at hand. While she waits, Barbara stands, turning to face a now conscious Ian standing eerily in the corner.
You're working late tonight, Miss Wright?
He remembers Barbara perfectly well, yay, but seems to think he's back at Coal Hill School. After Barbara informs him Susan's fetching some water, he notices the old man on the floor. Neither of them seem too concerned about his condition.
Shouldn't we help him?
While Susan's struggling to get water from the food machine, they inspect him further, with Ian confessing he doesn't think the wound is as bad as it looks. While I don't trust his medical opinion right now, at least the doctor's brain is functioning somewhat as he mumbles in his sleep.
I can't take you back, Susan. I can't.
Suddenly, Barbara recognizes where they are.
TARDIS!
Susan, still dazed, re-enters the console room and is stunned to see the TARDIS doors opened. She finds the others just standing around with 1,000-yard stares. After she tells them they could never open on their own, Ian pulls a move straight out of any Little Sister's playbook.
Perhaps he did it.
Barbara suggests maybe they opened in a crash, but Susan insists that isn't possible. Well, anything's possible with enough time, Susan.
What?
She senses another presence in the ship, but no one quite believes her. Typical. While Susan and Barbara tend to the doctor's wounds, Ian wanders off towards the doors. Whenever he approaches them, they close, but when he walks back towards the console, they open again. Susan goes to play with the controls, but the moment she touches them, she's gracefully knocked out again. Ian finally asks the question we're all dying to know the answer to.
What's going on here?
The doctor starts moving, so Barbara, the most relatively together of them all, takes charge, instructing Ian to take Susan to bed while she treats him.
Anything happens, let me know.
Well, what could happen?
I don't know.
God, the story's so bizarre. While she's tending his bandaged head, the doctor lets her know where the pain is.
I can't see anything. There's no bump or bruise or anything.
Perhaps hit on the back of the neck.
So it's the same as Susan's. How strange. After lowering one of the beds in the dormitory, which apparently the TARDIS has, Ian gently lays Susan down before checking her temperature. Since she's feeling hot, he heads off to get her some water. After fighting a bit with the machine, he returns to find Susan not so unconscious anymore, wielding a pair of scissors and looking an awful lot like Jack Torrance. Even the way she's talking now is creepy.
Who are you?
When Ian tries to take the weapon from her, she swings at him. It's then she starts to sort of fight her own body, plunging the blade several times into the mattress before collapsing again, letting the scissors fall harmlessly to the floor. A little bit later in the TARDIS waiting room, the shears are secured and the doctor is up and speaking. The doctor insists the ship must have just landed somewhere on its own, but Barbara demands to know where. Apparently she doesn't take neurological impairness lightly. Still feeling head pain, the doctor is sick of the interrogation, which naturally leads her to believe he has no idea how to control the TARDIS and where it goes. As she storms back off to the control room, Ian takes a good cop approach to the question asking. Tired of the bombardment, the doctor stands to check the fault locator, demanding to know if any of his home intruders touched anything. Barbara doesn't even bother to answer, as she's so insulted. She does, however, bring up Susan's idea from before, that something else may have entered the ship. The men laugh at the idea, Ian literally, but he's still in a bit of a wacky haze, so I'll forgive him for this one. The doctor, however, considers the suggestion completely impossible.
But as I said, it's not very logical.
No, it isn't. But does it have to be?
After pulling the old "I've been very patient with you" line, he sets off to check the fault locator, determined to actually do so this time. The doctor asks Ian to help him since Susan's out of commission, and he agrees. However, Ian warns him not to approach the main console since it affected Susan so much.
Well, perhaps it would be wiser to check the fault locator first. I'm glad I thought of that. Yes, come along, come along.
What a leader! Ian stays behind a bit to tell Barbara to watch over Susan and not to tell her about the potential intruder. Meanwhile, she's awake again, stealing her weapon back, looking like she's from the bad place.
This is the bad place!
At the fault locator, the doctor's having trouble seeing the numbers displayed, so he asks Ian to take a look for him. Unfortunately, they seem fuzzy to everyone. Back in the dormitory, Susan's still being creepy, while Barbara wipes her brow. But at least she remembers her old history teacher's name again. After asking if there's anything wrong with the ship and receiving a good old-fashioned "I don't know" as an answer, Susan shows off her newfound paranoia.
Why did you ask me if I knew who you were?
Barbara, feeling uneasy, demands the scissors be returned. Way to pay attention there, Barbara! With Susan wielding the blade again, she demands the truth, having overheard everyone talking about power failures and stowaways.
You've lied to me.
Now a mob boss, she raises the weapon, but once again fights herself long enough for it to be taken away. Barbara confesses she thinks they're all imagining things and that no one else is actually on the ship. But the door was open. Maybe it's hiding?
In one of us.
Barbara refuses to entertain the idea, suggesting the others would think the notion crazy. Any notion's possible with enough time, Barbara. Ian returns to reveal that they found no mechanical fault with the ship, so the doctor supposes the issue must be exterior and plans to check the screens. Susan freaks out and races to stop him. Fortunately, he doesn't seem to be in much of a hurry. She warns him about the crippling pain in her neck she felt when she touched the console, and he realizes his pains are similar. Ian admits that he and Barbara weren't affected like that at all. The doctor takes the risk and turns on the screen, completely unharmed.
Why does he keep looking at us like that?
Yeah, I wouldn't like him looking at me that way either. On the screen, they see what could very well be English countryside, but being merely a photograph, it can't be a recording of what's outside. The doors open on their own again. Ian runs to close them, but they start closing on their own before he ever touches the switch. There's a new picture on the screen of Quintus in the Fourth Universe, a planet the Doctor and Susan visited before ever reaching Tardis Lane. The Doctor explains that the TARDIS has a memory bank recording every previous journey. Ian denies ever hearing this before, but the suspicious Doctor remembers differently. The picture changes to a PowerPoint presentation of a moon becoming farther and farther away before an explosion. Ian's still confused, but the Doctor, chuckling to himself, doesn't quite believe him. Before accusations start flying, Barbara suggests they look outside, but the Doctor says that now it's what's inside the ship that's important. He accuses them of sabotaging the ship and knocking Susan and himself unconscious. He thinks they did it to blackmail him into bringing them home.
Oh, don't be so stupid!
I know it, I'm sure of it.
How dare you! Do you realize, you stupid old man, that you'd have died in the Cave of Skulls if Ian hadn't made fire for you? And what about what we went through against the Daleks? Not just for us, but for you and Susan, too. And all because you tricked us into going down to the city.
But
Accuse us? You ought to go down on your hands and knees and thank us. But gratitude's the last thing you'll ever have, or any sort of common sense either.
You tell him, Barbara. Before the Doctor has time to think of a comeback, Barbara screams, spotting the shattered face of the control room's clock. All of their watches are broken too. While Ian starts to argue that this can't possibly be the teacher's fault, he realizes their accuser is missing. Oh, he just went off to brew the quickest pot of tea ever. Ian suspiciously takes the first glass, then Barbara. Susan's the last to be served before he takes a glass for himself. This sudden bustling mood change has not eased anyone's anxiety. Barbara heads off to bed to clear her head with a night's rest, and Susan quickly follows. It seems Barbara's monologue really touched Ian earlier, because he finally seems back to normal, as he confronts the Doctor about his unwarranted cruel accusations and mistreatment of Barbara. The Doctor, however, says there's no time for niceties in this crisis, before wandering off to ponder on his own. He does, of course, have to have one last dig before parting.
Rash action is worse than no action at all.
Ian follows him out to continue their row while Susan conspicuously eavesdrops. But the Doctor remains unmoved in his suspicions. If anything, they've grown stronger.
One man's law is another man's crime. Sleep on it, Chesterton. Sleep on it.
Susan returns to the dorm where Barbara is resting and does what her grandfather never could. Not this version of him, anyway. Apologize.
I'm sorry for what Grandfather said to you.
She asks for Barbara to understand where her grandfather comes from and forgive him, but Barbara's more interested in getting a whole situation behind her with sleep. Later that evening, figuratively speaking, they are in a time machine, the doctor creeps into both the women and men's dorms to ensure everyone is sound asleep. Chuckling to himself, he returns to the console. However, before he can pull any levers or press any buttons, a hand grabs his shoulder and pulls him back. Cliffhanger! But not for us, because we're on to part 2, the brink of disaster, where hopefully we'll all find out what the hell is happening. It turns out Ian was the one trying to strangle the doctor, but he doesn't seem totally there as he's easily thwarted and falls back to the floor. Barbara, suddenly awake, runs in and falls to her friend's side. The doctor is convinced Ian's the culprit, and after that display I don't quite blame him, but Barbara uses the fact that he's fainted by the console just like Susan to disagree. She may have a point. Susan's also been showing some homicidal behavior. However, since it was Barbara who told him Susan fainted to begin with, he doesn't believe her about that either. He's convinced that Barbara and Ian are scheming against him, and is frustrated they won't just admit it.
Yes. Why don't you?
Jesus Christ, Susan, knock or something. Calling the kettle black, she accuses the teachers of behaving strangely, completely about-facing since her apology earlier. The doctor vows to treat them as enemies as Barbara returns to Ian's side, struggling to wake him up. Susan asks how he wound up on the floor, and hearing it's from going near the console, she confesses the same thing happened to her. Describing her injuries, Barbara works to win over Susan's constantly wavering trust. But the doctor won't have his only ally switch sides.
Don't touch it, Doctor!
Ian wakes up long enough to shout some too-late advice before collapsing back to the floor. That may not be a total fall, but he was sitting up and then fell back, so I'm gonna count it. With his outburst, Susan now believes them and argues with her grandfather on their behalf. However, he is determined to throw them off the ship. Whether on Earth, Skaro, or nowhere at all, they're getting out now. Barbara argues, of course, but doesn't manage much. Ian's slipping way out of it. Barbara struggles to get him to his feet, much less to fight. Susan continues to plead for them, but an alarm interrupts the debate. The doctor runs to check the fault locator and finds that now literally everything is wrong. Ian slowly wraps his hands around Barbara's neck, but since he's still weak, his crazed killer behavior is easily resisted as he succumbs back into a fuzzy state of consciousness. With new information, the doctor rushes to help Ian up, explaining to Barbara how the fault locator works, directing him to the point of failure with a light. With all of it lit, the ship is bordering on total disintegration, which is never a good thing, but with them inside, it's terrible. He confesses that it's all their fault as Ian starts to stir again, and admits to drinking their tea earlier to make them sleep. Ian suspected as much, but he did warn the doctor not to go near the console, so in both their minds, now they're even. On the brink of destruction, they now must all work together to stop the ship from going down.
Why did you say that? The brink of destruction.
There's a strong force at work somewhere which is threatening my ship. It's so strong that every piece of equipment can be out of action at the same time.
The doctor informs him that it can't be a crash or an alien presence, since the indicator would be working as normal. He even admits that he doesn't think it's the two teachers anymore. Susan, having kept an eye on the fault locator, reports back that all the lights flash every 15 seconds precisely. Barbara links this with the broken clocks, but I'll let her explain, since after about 10 viewings of this story throughout my lifetime, I still don't fully understand.
We had time taken away from us, and now it's been given back to us because it's running out.
A blast from the console spreading them all out serves almost as approval of her theory, as the column once again starts to rise and fall. With everything supposedly broken, this should, of course, be impossible. The doctor explains that the heart of the TARDIS lies under the console, and that its power source made it move. If the column comes out completely, all of the power escapes. Since they can't control the power right now, the power is free to do what it wants, including leave them forever. I think this information is much easier to take in visually than as exposition. But not only is this 1960s Doctor Who, it's the lowest budget serial ever. So I understand them doing what they can. The Doctor concludes that they have 10 minutes left to live. That's how long it should take for the remaining power to leave them. The Doctor wanders back by the console, but when Ian warns him to be careful, he recalls standing in this very position when he flicked on the screens earlier. Barbara wonders aloud how this one spot is safe while Susan starts to have a panic attack. Understandable, given the whole now 9 minutes left to live thing. Bonded over impending doom, the Doctor confesses he wished he had some sort of clue to stop their end from coming. Little does he know there have been plenty of clues, and Barbara, the true Velma of the group, has quickly begun to piece them all together. She deduces that the TARDIS broke the clock to draw their attention to time, while the fault locator's consistent flashing still allowed them to keep it. The Doctor argues that the machine can't think. Rude. But Barbara insists that the defense mechanism was simply trying to tell the travelers that the error was with them. She moves on to the column and the power trying to escape from beneath it, asking a crucial question that has never been asked before. Why is the power trying to escape? With science teacher Ian, the Doctor speculates that only something as large as a solar system would have the force to attract it so strongly. The so-called machine bangs again in approval. Ian surmises that the escaping power is why everyone near the console gets shocked, but the doctor informs him that the pure energy would atomize him instantaneously. With only the scanner section safe, he approaches, sending Barbara and Susan to watch the doors in case they open again. Summoning Ian with a snap, he confesses he lied earlier, overseeing their time remaining to protect the women. Yeah, they could have handled it, Doctor. If anything, they've been more emotionally calm and sane than the both of you. Even Susan was strong enough to fight the strange killer urge, more than Ian ever did. He asks Ian to share these presumable last moments with him. Despite the sexism, I'm glad the romance is beginning to bloom. He flicks on the scanner, and as English countrysides reappear, the doors open, revealing once again the emptiness of space. Not space, more like a void. Barbara and Susan return to the console as Quinnis appears on the screen and the doors close, building on her theories with another observation. With pleasant pictures, the doors open, but when unpleasant, they close. The PowerPoint returns next, with the final flash sparking new ideas. The Doctor and Barbara conclude that it's their journey, that the ship was caught in the explosion, and the defense mechanism protected them from total annihilation. The console once again blasts in celebration of a truth revealed.
I know. I said it would take the force of a total solar system to attract the power away from my ship. We're at the very beginning. The new start of a solar system. Outside, the atoms are rushing towards each other, fusing, coagulating, until minute little collections of matter are created. And so the process goes on, and on, until dust is formed. Dust then becomes solid entity, a new birth of a sun and its planets.
There's my doctor. Ian, feeling the time crunch, asks the Doctor to remember where he was going after leaving Skaro. He reveals that he wanted to return to Earth in the past, and did so with the fast return switch. Inspecting the device right by the scanner, they found that it never released and was stuck between positions this whole time. With a little jiggery-pokery, Ian and the Doctor repair it, and light returns to the TARDIS, a far better place than at the end of the tunnel where it was before. Susan asks why the fault locator didn't find the break, but her grandfather explains that it wasn't technically broken. It was still fully functional, just caught between settings. He actually explains it beautifully.
Let me give you a demonstration. Now look, when I put my thumb on there, the light comes on. And it only stays on so long as my thumb is pressing that switch. As soon as I take it off, a little spring inside releases the switch here, and out goes the light.
I see. So if the spring were broken, it would be as if your finger were pressing it down all the time.
Precisely.
Their celebration on surviving, however, is cut a little bit short when Susan brings up how poorly he treated the teachers. Ian's quick to forgive, probably because he treated the Doctor just as poorly by almost strangling him. But Barbara, the one who pretty much solved everything, not so much. The Doctor confesses that it's because of her instinct and not his logic that they survived, and thanks her for saving them. Feeling mixed emotions, she quietly leaves the room as the Doctor sets the ship in motion again. Later on, once everyone's had a chance to change and rest a bit, the Doctor joins Barbara in the lounge. He tells her they've landed somewhere cold with breathable air, but she admits that Susan told her all this earlier. It's not hard to sense she's still unhappy with him and his behavior earlier. He supposes it's the injustice that upset her so much, but points out that had he not been so unfair to her, she wouldn't have been so determined to prove him wrong. An interesting apology approach, despite its accuracy. Susan runs in, donning winter attire, and asks if the two are going outside.
Yes.
As she leaves, the Doctor motions towards the coat that Susan had pulled from the vast wardrobe for Barbara, and gleefully he holds it up for his invaluable new friend, as she slips her arms through the sleeves. Arm in arm, they head for the console room, where Ian awaits them. Susan playfully throws snow at them all, luring Barbara into a snowball fight outside, while the men admire Ian's cloak, apparently gifted to the Doctor by Gilbert and Sullivan. Their admiration quickly ends, however, when Susan, on the screen, shows them massive footprints in the snow outside. Here's a list of all the cast and crew that worked on this story. I know I didn't really mention any fun behind-the-scenes info during this one, like how every switch on the TARDIS was designated with a purpose, and how the label we see was from rehearsals and never intended to be seen on screen. But this story is so difficult to follow that breaking it up with sporadic information was impossible. However, to make up for it, I will be talking about its writer now. David Whittaker was born on April 18, 1928, in Hertfordshire, England. The BBC discovered his prowess through a play he authored called A Choice of Partners for the York Repertory Group in 1957. He worked for several other shows before becoming the story editor for the first season of Doctor Who in 1963. His only writing credit during that period was this story, due to the need for a 2-episode arc to fill the initial 13-episode order. All of the stories prepared at that point were longer, and so Whittaker hurried and forged the script in 2 days, drawing influence from earlier ideas of exploring the TARDIS and its capabilities further. Due to Writers Guild complications, he wasn't given the story editor credit for this particular serial. While his story editor position would end in the early stories of Season 2, his presence and influence continued, as he would go on to write several more stories, spanning several Doctors. He also christened Bookshelves the very first novelization of a Doctor Who story. Because believe it or not, kids, there once was a time where there were no reruns.
It's a rerun.
With Dalek Mania running rampant, The Daleks was the perfect first story to transcribe in 1964. Because of his book's success, the Doctor Who library has over 150 titles and is continuing to expand to this day. He would go on to write several more stories for the Whoniverse in the form of novels, short stories, and even a play. He was in the middle of writing another narrative when he unfortunately passed away from cancer on February 4th, 1980. However, as with all authors, his spirit will always live on in the stories he left behind. I noticed people talking a lot in recent years about how modern-day Who has become unnecessarily overcomplicated. In response, I like to show them this story. Doctor Who has always existed on a spectrum of complexity and convolution. Even its lead has been inconsistent for 6 decades now. And do you know what? This unpredictability and constant adapting, both on-screen and off, is one of the many things that keeps this show alive. Whittaker wrote the script in 2 days. He adapted. Sure, I still don't get the amnesia and violent outburst aspect of this story, the latter of which producer Verity Lambert had to apologize to the BBC Children's Department for, but that's okay. If it were a regular occurrence, it wouldn't be, but for this stepping stone, this growing pain for both author and show, it is. While the lighting and design by Raymond Cusick, the designer of the Daleks, is on absolute point, the plot isn't. It is strong in its basic form, but it wasn't executed quite well. However, despite the story's shortcomings, in the end, the very last 10 minutes, our 4 heroes are defined. They're no longer a captor and prisoners or inconvenienced allies, but friends. At the end of our 3-story beginning, you can't quite ask for more. Despite the ending, however, I will have to rate this story last on my personal list so far. It's just the becoming attempted murderers thing. I really don't get it. That tension could have been achieved without making 2 people on and off again Arkham patients, and then never quite explaining why. The next story is going to be interesting. You see, for those who don't know, in the 70s, the BBC tossed and destroyed several hundred old show tapes they imagined no one would ever want to watch again. This video massacre included over 100 Doctor Who episodes spanning the first 2 Doctors' runs. Fortunately, several were recovered over time through Indiana Jones-esque hunts and luck. And, while not all of them exist as video, they do all exist in audio form. That is the state of the entirety of the next serial. It is the only completely missing serial for quite a while, but it's still completely missing. Therefore, I'm going to try something a little bit different with it. It may take 1 video, or it may take 2. 7 episodes is a lot to cover, but it deserves to be acknowledged and appreciated just like the rest. I hope you'll all join me for the next Doctor Who breakdown of Marco Polo. This is Punxsy Dawn saying goodbye, and Allons-y.